Hi everyone, welcome back. You are watching Tax Vichara, where we bring you knowledge, updates, and practical tips on tax. This video is part of a series on what is transfer pricing, where we discuss the basics of India TP provisions. My name is Vaishaka Bhatt. I'm a practicing CA with specific focus on international tax and transfer pricing. Today, we are at Module 3 where we shall discuss about international transactions. If this is your first time here, please watch the earlier modules. In Module 1, I give an overview of the India TP provisions. In Module 2, I've discussed in detail on what is an enterprise and when do two enterprises qualify as associated enterprises. Now let's move on to this video. As we have seen before, there are four primary ingredients for applicability of TP. There should be two or more enterprises. Those enterprises should qualify as associated enterprises. Such enterprises should enter into a transaction and the transaction should qualify as an international transaction. So in today's module, we look at what is a transaction and when do they become an international transaction under the India TP regulations. Transaction is defined under section 92F. As per the definition, a transaction includes an arrangement, understanding, or action in concert, whether or not it is formal or in writing, whether or not it is enforceable or intended to be enforceable in a legal proceeding. It is necessary to understand the meaning or the coverage of transaction under the TP regulation. It is different from what we understand as a transaction in normal commercial parlance or under the contract law. Please note here that it just requires two parties to have an understanding arrangement or to even act in concert. It need not be reduced to writing in an agreement or a MOU or a letter. It can just be an oral understanding. More importantly, there is no requirement for a consideration to be agreed. Now let's move on to see what is international transaction. It is defined under section 92B and is further divided into two parts, 92B subsection 1 and subsection 2. Let us see what the subsection 1 talks about. It says that the transaction shall become an international transaction when it is entered into between two or more associated enterprise where either one or both of those parties are non-residents. Here, we are told that there has to be a transaction between two or more enterprises who are associated enterprises and at least one of them should be a non-resident. So naturally, it means that if the transaction is undertaken between two domestic companies or two resident persons, then TP will not apply even if they qualify as associated enterprises. The section goes on to further elaborate on international transaction. It shall refer to purchase, sale, or lease of tangible or intangible or provision of services or lending or borrowing of money, and it has a broad residual clause which says any transaction having a bearing on profits, income, losses, or the assets of the enterprise. So the section is listing down some of the commonly occurring transactions such as purchase, sale, services, borrowings, etc. It also includes a residual all catching clause that says any transaction that has a bearing on profits, income, losses, or assets. It is important again not to get confused with the requirement of a consideration for it to become an international transaction. In other words, even if there was a transaction undertaken on a free of cost basis, it could be an international transaction if it were undertaken between two associated enterprises, out of which at least one enterprise is a non-resident. We are told further that international transactions shall also include mutual agreements or arrangements for allocation or apportionment or any contribution to or any cost or expense incurred. Now, why is this important? Why was it separately introduced? Here, section is trying to sort of clarify that it's not just those transactions which are undertaken with profit motive that is potentially sought to be covered under this section, but any kind of a mutual agreement or an arrangement that two enterprises could enter into even if it involves merely cost pooling or sharing of costs between multiple enterprises for their mutual benefit, could also get covered within the definition of international transaction. A classical example for this could be that there is a company A in country A and company B in country B. If company A engages company B to provide certain R&D services to company A, then that falls within the second bullet which we have here, where it says company B is engaged in provision of services to company A. But there could be an alternative arrangement where company A and company B agree to undertake some R&D activity together, wherein they shall share the R&D cost between themselves in a mutually agreed ratio, and thereby also enjoy the results or fruits of the R&D efforts in the same ratio. In this case, both of them are coming together to undertake certain activities and have an arrangement where they want to share or allocate the cost and profits in a pre-agreed ratio. So the section here is clarifying even such arrangements could become an international transaction. Now the explanation to this section gives a long list of potential activities or items which could be considered as international transaction. What is interesting is the definition was expanded or enhanced by the Finance Act 2012 with retrospective effect from 1st April 2002. To look at it differently, Section 92B1, as we saw earlier, with its broad definition and residual clause, already had a wide coverage, and with the insertion of this explanation with retrospective effect, the legislators are suggesting that it is merely clarificatory in nature. The explanation starts by saying, for removal of doubts, it is hereby clarified that the expression international transaction shall include. So again, it's an inclusive definition. This slide captures the list for simplicity categorized into various buckets. So the first bucket that deals with the tangible property. It says purchase, sale, transfer or lease or use of any kind of a tangible property and includes building, vehicle, machinery, furniture, any article, etc. The second bucket talks about intangible property and it says it should include purchase, sale, transfer, lease or use of intangible property and shall include transfer of ownership, use or rights of commercial rights. The third bucket deals with capital financing and other related activities such as long-term and short-term borrowing, lending, provision of guarantee, purchase, sale of security or any kind of advance, receivable or payable, etc. Under the fourth bucket, we have services and covers market research, market development, marketing management, administration, technical service, repairs, design, consultation, agencies, etc. Lastly, we have a unique or a different clause which says that the transaction of business restructuring or reorganization entered into by an enterprise with the associated enterprise, irrespective of the fact that it has a bearing on profits, income, losses, or assets of such enterprise at the time of transaction or at any future date. This is very interesting definition here. Under the residual clause of the general definition under section 92B1, we were told that any transaction that has a bearing on profits, income, losses or assets could be an international transaction. Here, it is clarifying that the transaction of nature of business restructuring or reorganization shall be an international transaction irrespective of whether they have a bearing on profits, income, losses or assets. In essence, what we have here is a set of definition for both transaction and international transaction that is very wide. I have rarely seen a particular arrangement in a typical business situation not falling within the definition of international transaction. Please note that my statement only indicates that the definition of international transaction is wide. It does not, however, automatically mean that provisions of TP is applicable to such international transaction. We will discuss those in detail in the next module. What we saw in section 92B1 was that a transaction undertaken between two or more associated enterprises shall be international transaction provided at least one of the associated enterprises is a non-resident. So, the primary requirement for international transaction was that it would be undertaken between associated enterprises. Under Section 92(b)(2), the second part of the definition, the law goes on to further expand the scope of the term international transaction to include certain transactions entered into with third party, meaning unrelated parties. Such transactions could be deemed to be an international transaction entered into between associated enterprises. In other words, transaction with an enterprise other than associated enterprise could become international transaction in certain circumstances. We will understand this with the help of a simple example. We have company A here. Its parent company B is outside India. Accordingly, A and B are associated enterprises. A is entering into a transaction with a third party. We have two situations here, one where the third party is an Indian resident and the other where the third party is outside India, that is a non-resident. What 92(b)(2) does is that it deems the transaction entered into by A with the third party as international transaction provided certain conditions are satisfied. So what are those conditions? Number 1, it says that if there exists a prior agreement between such third party and B being the associated enterprise of A. So if B and third party had entered into an agreement for a transaction pursuant to which A is transacting with the third party, then the transaction between A and the third party could be an international transaction. Or the term of the relevant transaction between A and the third party is determined and agreed in substance between B and the third party. Number 2, either the taxpayer or the AE should be non-resident. So in this case, either A or B or both should necessarily be non-resident for this provisions to trigger. It further goes on to clarify that it doesn't matter whether the third party is a resident or a non-resident. For better clarity, let us look at this chart and understand all permutations and combinations. We have this picture here for reference purpose. The first column talks about the residential status of the taxpayer, which is A in our case. Second column gives the residential status of the third party. In our example, we have both a resident and a non-resident. The third column talks about the residential status of the AE, that is B in our example. It is assumed here that in all cases there is a prior agreement between B and the third party that governs the transaction which is proposed to be entered into by A with such third party. In the first situation, we are told that A is a resident, B is a non-resident, and third party is a resident. Very similar to the picture we have here. The conclusion is that section 92(b)(2) will apply because between A and B, one of them is a non-resident. In the second line, we are told A is a resident, B is a non-resident, and the third party is a non-resident. Again, this is a similar situation that was covered in the picture. Residential status of third party does not matter. Since B is a non-resident, section 92(b)(2) will be applicable. In the third situation, we are told that A itself is a non-resident and B, the parent company, is a resident. The third party is a resident. And here again, what we have to check for is for column 1 and 3, that is, one of them should be a non-resident. Since A is a non-resident, it is applicable. In the fourth situation, same status for A and B, but the third party is a non-resident. As we saw earlier, it doesn't matter. Since A is a non-resident, the section is applicable. In the fifth and the sixth situation, we are told that both A and B are outside India, but the third party is resident in fifth situation and non-resident in the sixth situation. Since as per the condition, at least one of them should be non-resident, it satisfies a situation where both are non-resident. The conditions are hence satisfied in both these situations. The residential status of the third party is irrelevant. One point of caution here, while technically the section will apply, since A is a non-resident, this whole evaluation will be undertaken only if it has a taxable nexus to India. We will look at this in detail in the coming module. For the time being, what you have to understand is that if it is concluded that provisions of tax and TP is applicable to A in its status as a non-resident taxpayer, then in the above facts, section 92B2 shall be triggered. In the last two situations, we are told that both A and B are residents and the third party is a resident in the 7th situation and non-resident in the 8th situation. Since neither A nor B is a non-resident, section 92B2 shall not be applicable under both these situations. One important point to note here is that this section envisages a tripartite situation. That is, we have A, B, and third party in the example. Let us see how the section operates if there are four parties involved. We can understand this with an example. Here, we are given the facts as follows. FCO 1 and FCO 2 are a part of two different multinational groups of companies and are accordingly not related to each other. ICO 1 and ICO 2 are wholly owned subsidiaries of FCO 1 and FCO 2 respectively. Accordingly, ICO 1 and FCO 1 are associated enterprises. Likewise, ICO 2 and FCO 2 are associated enterprises. Now, this is a very commonly occurring fact pattern in a multinational situation. FCO 1 and FCO 2 have entered into a master services agreement for consultancy services to be provided by the group of companies of FCO 1 to FCO 2. As per the agreement, FCO 1 and FCO 2 have agreed on the broad scope of work and the hourly rate for consultancy services that would be charged by the FCO 1 group to FCO 2 group. Pursuant to this master service agreement, ICO 1 and ICO 2 enter into a local consultancy agreement. The question raised is whether transaction between ICO 1 and ICO 2 qualify as deemed international transaction. Let's go back to the conditions that were given to us for determining whether 92B2 is applicable. So we need a taxpayer, that is ICO 1. ICO 1 is entering into a transaction of provision of consultancy services to ICO 2, which is a third party. FCO 1 is the associated enterprise of ICO 1, which is a non-resident. So the next condition is whether there is a prior agreement between the AE and the third party. Yes, of course, there is a prior agreement, which is a master service agreement that covers the relevant transaction. However, it is not entered into between ICO 2, the third party, and FCO 1, but it is entered into between FCO 2 and FCO 1. FCO 2 here is the AE of the third party. This kind of situation is not envisaged under section 92B2. Because it is a deeming section, we have to literally interpret it. The literal reading of the section suggests that if FCO 1 and ICO 2 had entered into a prior agreement, or if the terms of the relevant transactions are in substance agreed between them, only in such a scenario the transaction of ICO 1 and ICO 2 could be considered as deemed international transaction. In this situation, we will conclude therefore that it will not qualify as a deemed international transaction. However, as an overall hygiene point and as a practice of good governance, it is essential for ICO 1 to ensure that its transaction with ICO 2 are negotiated and agreed based on competitive terms. So we have seen the primary four conditions for applicability of TP. In the next module, we will discuss next steps that should be evaluated if the four conditions are satisfied. As we have discussed in the past, once these four primary ingredients are fulfilled, taxpayer shall compute his income and claim expenses having regard to the arm's length price in respect of these international transactions with the associated enterprises. Then he has to meet certain compliance requirements like obtaining an accountant certificate and maintaining detailed TP documentation. Failure to do so would attract penal consequences. We will look at these requirements in detail in the coming module. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next module.